My name is Betsy Leeds. I'm a school psychologist, and I'm going to share some information with you about school psychology. A lot of this information is from the National Association of School Psychologists website, and so you would have that as something you could access if you wanted to after we're done. School psychologists in general, for the most part, work in public schools, and they're there to help students and staff and faculty make the best situations that they can and address the needs of students. They use their strengths in order to capitalize on the needs that they have. They provide intervention for students at the student level, the school level, and sometimes district or co-op level. School psychologists also work with students specifically with individuals or in groups. They develop programs that fit the needs of those students and help teachers to support the students in the classrooms. In addition to helping the staff at school, school psychologists often work with parents and community agencies in order to address the needs that students may have with different disabilities or exceptionalities to be more successful in society. Sometimes that involves prevention and addressing crisis or substance abuse. One of the main jobs of a school psychologist is consultation and collaboration, and that again is with teachers, parents, administrators to help those students that have maybe mental health, learning, or behavior problems. They help other people understand what's developmentally appropriate for students and how they learn, especially when there's an exceptionality that the child may have. And we also work between parents, administrators, teachers, to provide support for those students broadly. It's a little bit easier for school psychologists to do so because as opposed to a K-12 teacher, we don't have 20, 25 students sitting in front of us, and we do have the flexibility to meet with parents before and after and during school when teachers may not have that option. Another part of a school psychologist's job is evaluation. A lot of times we're very involved in evaluating students for special education services. We know a lot about special education law and the requirements that the State Department has for providing services for students. We make sure that students have access to the academic skills and supports that they need in the public schools, private as well. And we also make sure that we look at that social emotional development and mental health status in order to support that learning at school. We also help teachers and administrators evaluate the learning environment. So for example, if we were to have a classroom that was an open classroom for a set of early childhood students, we all know what young children often do in settings where there's no boundaries. And so if you put a bookshelf or a row of cubbies or some sort of table down the middle of a classroom in an early childhood room, then students are less likely to run around and get into things that they're not supposed to. So even knowing little things like that to look at the learning environment in order to enhance things for students is something that a school psychologist would know and help others with. Intervention is a really big part of our job, providing counseling for those that need it, whether it's social skills training, working with children who have deployed parents, maybe students who have their parents have divorced recently or are suffering with some sort of grief. We'd like to provide those types of services. We don't do a lot of therapy, maybe as you would think, 50 minutes on a couch. We would probably refer to another agency, maybe community counseling or something like that, if that were the case. We work directly with parents and families in order to help them at home with interventions, maybe supporting their learning at home, completing homework or behavior intervention plans in the house. And we also work overall helping staff and students work through anger management types of issues. And then if there are any crises, within the school or the community, school psychologists are broadly trained and able to address some of those concerns also. Ideally, we would like to work a lot with prevention in order to not have to have such significant interventions. So when we see that a child is at risk for failing, we will try to provide supports. We also look at the demographics of schools and buildings and try to provide supports for groups of students that statistically the research shows may be at risk for failing in order to support them and the educational system that they're in. We also work with providing resources for students and staff for that matter to promote tolerance and understanding of people who may be different, ethnically or have disabilities, just so that we're more accepting and open to the diversity that we have in our schools. And that may include developing programs or schools, anti-bullying programs, positive behavior supports is one of my favorite programs to help everybody in the school be more successful and understand what they're supposed to do. And again, we don't have 25 students in front of us in the classroom, so we do have some flexibility of having the information about education and then are able to look into the community to provide services and help for the students as necessary. Those partnerships that we can make in the community are very important. So I think it's key that if you do become a school psychologist, that you know the environment that you're in order to provide the best support for the students in the schools that you serve. There is an element of research and planning within school psychology, and maybe it's not as much as you would think maybe at the university where you are doing an IRB packet and submitting some research and having it published. It's much more like knowing where good research comes from, where good best practices come from, and how to use that and evaluate that information to make sure it's going to serve the population of children that you work for. So maybe you work in a rural school and the children are of a similar race or socioeconomic status. That would have a different set of needs and strengths than maybe an urban school that has a different makeup. And so keeping that in mind when you're picking programs to help students is important. It's often the school psychologist's job to help teams in the schools identify and implement programs, for example, positive behavior supports or different curriculums, things like that to support the school and the students. And it's key to understand how to find effective, valid, and reliable research in order to put those best practices into place. Overall, school psychologists, hence the name school psychologist, a majority work in public and private school systems. In the United States, you're not required to have school psychologists in private schools. They usually have access to them, but may not be assigned to that, depending on the makeup of your district or your co-op and how they serve those private schools. Sometimes school psychologists worked in health-based centers, maybe like children's hospitals, those types of things. Private practice, for the most part, people with PhD level trained psychologists would have that as an option. Obviously, there's school psychologists at universities, and often they're training other future school psychologists. And then sometimes they're employed by other state agencies to help develop maybe special ed law or other educational programs in those agencies. Overall, school psychology is important because we work with all students. Now, a lot of the things that I have said have talked about children who are at risk for failing or having exceptionalities or concerns in school. But at any one time, anybody in the schools could need services. And if you were a typically developing student in the public schools, you may not have ever met your school psychologist. You may not have even realized there was a school psychologist in your school, but there was access to one. I almost guarantee you that. Sometimes school psychologists are there just when people feel afraid or worried. If there's a lot of media about maybe kidnapping or something, often school psychologists help intervene and help schools deal with those issues. Sometimes students are just having a rough time, maybe a disagreement with a teacher, or for some reason have some behavior outbursts and lack that self-discipline, and so they would need support during those times. Everybody gets sad or depressed at different times, and so school psychologists can assist with that. And we all know, there's students that experiment with drugs, alcohol, and suicide, worry about their sexuality and kind of how that works and where that goes. And so I think it's important to realize that we are there not only to help those students who may need special education services, but the bigger population in general. And we often do that working with school counselors or school social workers or behavior interventionists if they're available in our buildings. Overall, school psychologists are just there to be an advocate for that student, and we make the team, parents and teachers in the community work together to help address the concerns of the child, because ultimately we want them to grow into successful adults. Currently, the statistics, and these are a bit dated, but they're the most current that the National Association of School Psychologists has posted. Right now, 74% of school psychologists in the United States are women, and 47.5% of those school psychologists are over the age of 50. So that leads us to see that a lot of them are baby boomers, and they will be retiring in the next few years. And so I do feel that this is a career that will continue to have a need and a demand for students to graduate and become school psychologists. And there's the statistics. 83.1% of school psychologists do work in the public schools. And then you can see the numbers dwindle down the categories. If you are a bilingual school psychologist, there are often incentives or more money for you to maintain that and to work in a broader number of schools because of the number of students with second and third languages that we're working with. So if you'll notice, 17.9% of the current U.S. population over the age of 5 speaks a language other than English in the home. And so obviously those types of things may impact their learning and how this child learns, and it's important for us to recognize and understand that. In the district that I was in Kansas, I think there was 37 different languages spoken in a small school district. The National Association of School Psychologists pulled out that 90 foreign languages were spoken in the Los Angeles school district. So I think that just kind of gives you the idea of what's out there. So I would encourage you, if you're going to be, have a second language, it may be a good choice in the long run for you. I've mentioned the pending retirements leading to shortages. There are already a current shortage of university trainers for school psychologists. And there's also a big gap between the ethnicity of practitioners. They're often Caucasian, and then the students that we're serving. So I think that's important. So there are opportunities and even scholarships for those that come from different backgrounds to be successful, and incentives to be in school psychology. Overall, I think it's a great career choice. I chose this at age 17 and never changed my major, so I might be slightly biased, but you work with children who need you. You're helping parents and educators. You work in the public schools, and so it is nice to have snow days when they happen, to also have some time off in the summer. School psychologists typically work 10 or 15 additional days than teachers do in the public schools. So for example, I would come in 5 days earlier than the teachers and stay 5 days longer during the school year. And I still got spring breaks and Christmas breaks and things like that. So that was nice for me. That was something I really enjoyed. Maybe the pay is not as much as a 12-month position, but it was nice. I never had 2 days the same because I often had different parent meetings, different meetings with student improvement teams, or response to intervention, working with students. So every day was different. If there was a crisis that popped up, that's what we dealt with instead of maybe what I had on the calendar or planned. So I think it is critical that school psychologists are flexible and have good time management skills to make sure they get everything that they need to done in the amount of time that's necessary. School psychologists are broadly trained to meet all of those needs and work in a lot of different settings. And so I think that would make you feel confident that your position's going to be there for a while. And just as a side note, it's been mentioned in U.S. News and World Report as one of the best careers. I know since 2009 and every year and continues to be in the 2012 issue.